Hey there, I am back and we are on our final chapter of our read aloud book, Escaping the Nazis, on the Kindertransport. And the book is written by Emma Carlson Burney. Chapter 9 is the last chapter and it's titled Life After the Kindertransport, The Children's Stories. So it's going to kind of let you know what happened to all the kids that we've talked about so far. It starts off with a photo of children on the first Kindertransport to Norwich, England. So the first time it ran, these are the people that were on it. And remember, their plan was to save 10,000 children by sending them to England. So here we go, last chapter. Many of the children of the Kindertransport went on to have long lives. Most were swept up in the war-ridden life of Great Britain during World War II. Tom Berman, the little boy with the suitcase, moved from England to Scotland to Israel, where he lived on a kibbutz later. He became a well-known professor of aquatic sciences. Tom rode the Kindertransport one more time in his life at the age of 75. A special commemorative Kindertransport train was organized. The train was a 1930s steam engine and passenger cars. Several surviving Kindertransport children, now elderly adults, rode it from Prague to eventually end in London. All right, so Tom Berman, it says Tom was one of these, and he wrote the poem Winton Train about the journey. He wrote, "Smelling again, the steam train smells, soot coming in the window as we cross the landscapes of the Czech lands, woods, and rolling fields. To Nuremberg of dark memories, the Rhineland, and a choir of Kinder singing. To Cologne along the level plains of Holland. Night crossing to Harwich with English gulls screeching as our train pulls out of the platform. The fins and coming at last, steam wreathed to Liverpool St. Street Station. Inspired by good, a voyage reenacted, passing on the message to a younger generation. So many stories, trajectories of lives, scattered, chance coincidences, punctuated with jazz sessions by the Hottentots, much laughter, tears, and a kaleidoscope of memories shared, old friendships found, and new bonds made." Tom died in 2013 at the age of 79 after falling from a cliff in the Galapagos Islands in a hiking accident. And there's a picture of Tom holding the passport and the visa that he used in the Kindertransport at the 75th anniversary celebration in 2009, so just about 4 years before he died. So he ended up having an okay life and then went back to revisit this experience on the 75th anniversary of it. Next, it talks about Kurt Fuchel. Kurt Fuchel went to live with a family called the Cohens once he reached England. Here he recalls the first time he set foot in their house. And he wrote, "I remember walking into the house after the ride from the heroic port. The image that comes to me is of a little boy, Kurt himself, dressed in his Austrian finery, short pants, jacket, long wool stockings held up by a suspender belt, and high-rising boots. The effect somewhat marred by the grubbiness accumulated during 3 days of travel. Ahead of me were the stairs going up to the second floor, at the foot of which stood the maid, Selina, who eyed me with obvious distaste and asked, 'Do we really have to keep him?' Near the top of the stairs sat John, a little boy of 5, shyly looking at his new brother. Down to business. I was stripped, scrubbed from head to toe, my clothes burnt, and new ones provided. Then the family gathered around the table for a magnificent chicken dinner. A smile returned to my face. Here was a language I could understand." Kurt spent many years with the Cohens, his English family, and kept in touch with them for the rest of his life. He fought in the British infantry during the war and was reunited with his parents after 8 years of separation. Both of them had survived the Holocaust. Kurt eventually immigrated to the United States and later wrote extensively about his experiences in Europe and England, including his time on the Kindertransport. He was one of more than 2,000 children who moved to the United States after the war. The next section talks about Harry Ebert. Harry Ebert was lucky too. His entire family survived the Holocaust and managed to immigrate to the United States in 1940. Harry fought in World War II as well and went on to become a welding engineer. He lived a long life, dying at the age of 95 in New York. There's a picture of Harry as an adult. Okay. Next section talks about Irene Schmid. says Irene Schmid never forgot the taste of the hot porridge with brown sugar that she was served on one of her first rainy nights in England, and she never forgot meeting her foster mother for the first time, a woman she quickly grew to love. She wrote, "So now there I was on the platform, hugging my doll, waiting for a new chapter in my life to begin. A figure detached itself from the crowd and hesitantly moved toward us, introducing herself as Pauline Muirhead. Her gray eyes sparkled with intelligence, and there was an educated clip to her voice. Her loose, tweedy clothes and the rosy shine of her cheeks gave her a countrified, unpretentious look that aroused immediate confidence in my mother. I also felt at ease, and this made the parting from my mother less painful and the trip into the country more exciting." It says Irene lived with Pauline and her husband, the philosopher John Muirhead, for almost 7 years. Her mother made it to England as well, and in 1946, Irene and her parents moved to Chile. Irene moved to New York as a young woman and spent her life in the United States, dying in 2010 at the age of 81. So that's a pretty happy ending too, right? Next section talks about Hans Schneider. Hans Schneider lived in Scotland during the war years. He believed that his parents suffered far more than he did in those years. During the next 5 years, we shared the experience of the British people at war, a remarkable people whom the world owes gratitude for their decision in September 1939 to fight Hitler. For a teenager, this was an exciting time. Though I was an avid reader of the newspapers, I did not realize the full horror of it until the war was over, Hans wrote. Some adult refugees were suspected of aiding the Germans. They were called enemy aliens. Hans's father was one of the accused and was interned by the British on the remote Isle of Man in Scotland. His mother was forced to give up her work and live in one room with several other poverty-stricken refugee women. And that's all it says about him. There's a picture of him. It says Hans Schneider with his wife Miriam, who was also a Kindertransport survivor. So he met someone on the Kindertransport that he actually ended up marrying, and they grew to be pretty old, it looks like. So, all right, and then the next section is about Ursula Rosenfeld. Ursula Rosenfeld remembered the joy of going to school. She told her interviewer, "We did start going to school in England, actually, and it was marvelous. I'd never realized what school really was like, that you could participate, and I did enjoy school. And the wonderful part about it, it had a library. I waded through that library, and that's how I learned to speak English, really. And through that, I got a love of English literature. But altogether, it was a wonderful experience, and the children were so friendly to us." Still, Ursula could not forget her mother. She needed to know where she was. "As soon as the war finished," she recalled, "I went to the Red Cross Committee and asked them to search. Eventually, we got a letter from them to say my mother had been killed in Minsk, in Russia, where she was deported. It's very hard to come to terms with when you've always had that hope. And of course, we've had no grave, really, no parting, no end, no funeral. It's that sort of vague feeling in the air of home, that hope suddenly fading. That terrible, wrenching image at the train station was the last time that Ursula ever saw her beloved mother." But there is a photo of Ursula and her family in 1964, from left to right, her daughter Jill, her son John, her husband Peter, her daughter Ruth, Ursula, and her son Paul. So she got married and had several children of her own. So things worked out okay for her, even though she lost her mother at a young age. Next section is Jack Hillman. Jack Hillman lived a strange and grand life in England. He spent his days roaming the grounds of Waddesdon Manor, the home of the Rothschilds. Jack also remembers being happy there. He writes, "My first impression of Waddesdon Manor was it was like a dream, like a castle I've seen in pictures, but never seen anything in person. The Cedars was a servant's house. 26 of us lived in the Cedars. The first thing we did was throw a soccer ball on the lawn and kick it around. The local boys wanted to see what was all of a sudden being brought into their little village. When it was time for dinner, they said, 'We'll see you tomorrow.' I was so excited. I was absolutely so exuberant. I ran into my house mother and told her, 'Someone who is not Jewish wants to see me tomorrow.'" But Jack could not forget that his parents were still in Germany. He knew they were in danger, and he was determined to get them out. And he wrote, "My father had a first cousin in London. Every weekend, I took the train into London and bombarded him. I said to him, 'Uncle Paul, we've got to get my parents out of Germany.' And he said, 'I can't do it.' After me being so insistent, he finally said, "I'll give him an affidavit if he has a working permit." I went back to the Rothschild estate, knocked on the door, and the butler, who was about 10'6", came out and looked at me. "What do you want?" I said, "I want to speak to Baron Rothschild." He said, "Wait here." I waited. After a couple of minutes, he says, "Follow me." I said to him, "Baron Rothschild, my father's cousin, will give him and my mother a visa providing he has a working permit." Without hesitation, he said to me, "Would he work on a chicken farm?" I said, "He'll do anything." He went to a notary and made out a working permit for my parents. It worked. Jack's parents made it out of Germany in the nick of time. They left the day before the war began, and they survived. Jack went back to Waddison Manor in 1983. He was a middle-aged man then, and the traumas of the war were long over. But he wanted to thank Dorothy de Rothschild, the wife of Baron Rothschild, who had saved his life and the life of 25 housemates more than 40 years before. 15 of the boys, now men, went to the reunion. Dorothy was 88 years old, but she remembered the boys clearly, and Jack was able to say what he wanted to say more than anything else, which was thank you. Okay, and then there's one last section about someone called Norbert Wilhelm and Nicholas Winton. It says Norbert Wilhelm and Nicholas Winton were recognized for their work saving Jewish children. They were called heroes, and Winton was given a knighthood. Wilhelm died in New York in 1998 at age 85. Sir Winton lived to be 106 and died July 1st, 2015. A memorial service held for him in London's Guildhall in May 2016 was attended by 400 people, among them 28 of those he had saved. But not all the stories of the Kindertransport children had happy endings. When the transports were organized before the start of the war, no one could imagine that 6 million Jews would be killed. The Kindertransport children knew their parents were in danger, but most people, the organizers, the families themselves, thought their families would be reunited after the war was over. And most of those people were wrong. Most children on the Kindertransport never saw their parents again. Their mothers and fathers died in concentration camps, labor camps, in ghettos, or on the streets of cities and towns in Germany, Austria, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. War took over Great Britain. Many Kindertransport children, then teenagers and young adults, joined the British military and fought for their adopted nation. Some immigrated to Israel or the United States. Still others had to endure another kind of trauma. Despite their status as Jewish refugees, some were imprisoned in Britain as enemy aliens. The British government was wary of anyone with a German background, Jewish or not, and swept through the towns and cities of Great Britain, spiriting foreigners away and placing them in internment camps. Of the more than 10,000 children who came to Great Britain, about half stayed. Most of the rest immigrated either to the United States or to Israel. But throughout their lives, the children of the Kindertransport never forgot their German past and the Kindertransport that saved them. They called themselves Kinderchildren in German, even when they were old men and women. As a group, the Kindertransport children grew up to be very successful. 2 of the 10,000 children won Nobel Prizes, Walter Kohn and Arno Penzias, and many of the children went on to work in helping professions. They were teachers, doctors, activists, and social workers. They had a strong desire to help strangers, as strangers had helped them. Altogether, the Kindertransport trains, boats, and planes directly saved more than 10,000 of the Kinder. More than 60,000 people owe their lives to the British Kindertransport. The children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of the Kinder all count themselves in that number. Most of the Kindertransport children would never have survived the war had they stayed in their native countries. They were 8, 10, 5 years old. The children were rich, poor, middle class, and in between. They were boys and girls. Some were babies. They wore labels around their necks. They carried leather suitcases and waved their hands bravely at the station, boarding the trains that carried them away from their parents and away from their childhood lives. 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis during the Holocaust. 1.5 million of them were children. But these 10,000 children were saved. That's the end of our book. So I hope you learned a little bit about the Holocaust and what happened to Jewish children back around the beginning of World War II. And I hope, if nothing else, it helps you to realize how lucky we are. I know that right now we are in this strange state where we don't really know what's going to happen in the near future because of this coronavirus. And, it's really odd. We're staying at home. We're, doing school from home, and some people aren't able to go back to work yet. And it's a struggle for a lot of us. But when I stop and think about what others have been through in the past, that's way worse than what I'm going through now. It makes me very thankful for everything that I have in my life now. So I hope that this book helped do that for you too, especially if you're starting to get kind of down about the circumstances of today. So hang in there. Know that your teachers miss you, and that we miss seeing you every day, and that we are doing the best we can to stay connected to you and to help you keep learning and to finish 5th grade. And we're going to be sorry to see you go on and be 6th graders next year. So I hope you enjoyed the book. I will talk to you all soon. I miss you guys.